She had never planned for this moment. It was never part of the picture she'd painted for herself when she said, "I do." But the way his eyes followed her every movement, the way his voice vibrated with unspoken understanding, made her question everything. She felt something stir inside her that had been dormant for too long, a yearning she had long suppressed. The routine of her life, once so comforting, now felt like a prison. The man she had married had become a shadow, distant and uninvolved. Their relationship had lost the spark, and no matter how much she tried to light it back up, it flickered out each time. Her partner, Matt, wasn't a bad man. He had never been cruel, never given her a reason to doubt his loyalty. But the affection she had once felt for him had faded. They had become like two strangers sharing the same space, their conversations reduced to polite exchanges about groceries or the weather. He came home late from work, barely noticing her presence. She had once craved his touch, his attention, but now those things seemed like distant memories. It wasn't that she hadn't tried. She would put on her best smile when he walked in, prepared a nice dinner, tried to start meaningful conversations. But it was like speaking into the void. He was there physically, but his mind was somewhere else, lost in his own world. And she was left yearning for connection, for the closeness they once shared, but had somehow lost. That longing had been gnawing at her for weeks, and one afternoon, it all came to a head. He stood in front of her that day, his eyes bright, his smile genuine. He wasn't just another man at the bar or the office. He was someone who had somehow slipped past the defenses she had carefully constructed around herself. A fleeting comment, a glance held too long, and everything inside her shifted. His presence felt electric, like a spark that ignited something she had long forgotten existed. The temptation was undeniable. When he smiled at her, she felt an instant connection, a bond that cut through the surface of her routine life. It was strange, unexpected, and thrilling. She tried to ignore the way her pulse quickened when their fingers brushed, how his voice sent shivers down her spine. But the more she tried to push him away, the stronger the pull became. It was no longer just an attraction, it was something more. Something deeper, more intense. There were moments when she found herself thinking about him even when he wasn't around. The way his eyes lingered on her when she spoke, how he would find reasons to be close to her, his laugh, the warmth of his touch. And each time, she felt herself unraveling. The guilt was there too, pulling her back, but it was drowned out by the desire for something more, something she hadn't realized she was craving. Was it wrong? She wasn't sure anymore. All she knew was that for the first time in months she felt alive. But the more she thought about it, the more the guilt grew. She couldn't deny it. She was married, committed, and here she was, fantasizing about someone else. The man she had promised herself to. The man who had been her partner through thick and thin. But what was she supposed to do when he barely noticed her? When his touch no longer sparked anything inside her? Was she supposed to simply accept it and live a life of quiet desperation? The questions haunted her every night. Was this betrayal, or was it an escape from the silence that had overtaken her marriage? She needed to figure it out, to make sense of what was happening inside her. It was clear now that it wasn't just a passing attraction, it was a craving, a need for something real, something passionate. And as she looked at him again that day, the decision began to form in her mind. There would be no turning back once she made it. She had never thought she would be the kind of person who would cross that line. But the desire was too strong. Her hands trembled, and her breath caught in her throat as the reality set in. She was about to make a choice that would change everything. The days that followed were filled with a strange mix of anticipation and dread. Her mind kept returning to him, his smile, the way his voice lingered in her thoughts, the subtle way he made her feel seen. It wasn't just about the physical attraction anymore. It was the emotional connection that had sparked between them, something she hadn't felt in years. Every time they spoke, she felt as though she was rediscovering a part of herself she had buried deep inside. The connection was undeniable, and the more she resisted, the more it pulled her in. She began to notice the small cracks in her marriage more sharply than before. Matt had become increasingly distant, not just physically, but emotionally. His work consumed him, leaving her to navigate the silence of their home alone. When he did speak to her, it was in passing, like a formality, and she was left with the sense that she was no longer a priority in his life. He was no longer interested in her. His focus was elsewhere. She had become invisible to him. The weight of this realization hung over her, pushing her further into the arms of the only person who made her feel alive again. The more time she spent with him, the more the lines blurred between right and wrong. She caught herself imagining a life without Matt, a life where she could finally feel desired, understood, and wanted. It wasn't just a fleeting fantasy. It felt like a possibility, a future she could almost reach out and grab. But guilt gnawed at her every time she allowed herself to entertain the thought. She still loved Matt in some way, but the love felt faded, like an old photograph whose edges had begun to curl. And here was someone who saw her, who made her feel as though she was worth more than just a passing glance. She began making excuses to see him more often, casual encounters that quickly grew into moments of shared laughter and subtle touches. Every glance they exchanged left her breathless, and each touch lingered longer than necessary, igniting something deep within her that she didn't know she still had. She was walking a fine line, and with each step, the weight of her choices pressed harder on her chest. The emotional connection between them grew stronger, and she found herself thinking about him constantly. One evening, after a brief but electric conversation, he leaned closer to her. His hand brushed against hers, and this time, neither of them pulled away. Her heart raced, her mind screamed for her to stop, but her body reacted before she could think. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She had already allowed herself to feel things she had sworn she would never feel again. The idea of being touched, of being wanted in a way she hadn't been in so long, overwhelmed her. It wasn't just about passion, it was about feeling seen, feeling like she mattered. Her guilt was still there, but it was no match for the way he made her feel. The tension between them was palpable, electric, as if every moment spent together only brought them closer to an inevitable outcome. She knew it was wrong, but at that moment, it felt so right. She had never allowed herself to be so selfish, to indulge in a desire she had buried deep within. But now, the choice was almost out of her hands. She found herself asking, what's the harm in just one more time? She told herself that it would end after this, that this was the last time she would allow herself to feel this way. But deep down, she knew that there was no going back. The decision had been made. The weight of her actions hit her like a wave crashing over her, leaving her breathless and disoriented. As the moments passed, the thrill that had pulsed through her veins just moments ago began to dissolve, replaced by a deep, suffocating guilt. She could still feel him, his touch, the heat of his body against hers, but the reality of what she had just done started to settle in. Her mind raced, thoughts clashing violently against one another. What now? What did this mean for her marriage, for her sense of self? Her heart pounded in her chest as she lay there, the silence around her growing heavier by the second. It was impossible to deny the fact that she had crossed a line, one that she could never uncross. The man she had been married to for years, Matt, was waiting for her at home, oblivious to the betrayal that had just taken place. The man who had once been her whole world, her partner in life, was nothing more than a shadow now. And she had just betrayed him, given herself to someone else in a moment of weakness, of intense longing that she couldn't control. But it wasn't just about Matt. It was about her. She had given up something crucial, something irretrievable, and she didn't know if she could ever reclaim it. The guilt wrapped itself around her like a vice, squeezing tighter with each passing second. The rush of excitement, the brief moment of freedom from her own quiet desperation, seemed so far away now. All that was left was the sinking feeling of loss. What had she really achieved? A brief escape from the emptiness? A fleeting moment of pleasure? But in return, she had lost a part of herself, a part of her integrity, something that could never be restored. She sat up slowly, trying to shake the fog in her mind, but it was no use. Every action, every touch from him, played over and over in her head. She could still hear the sounds, the rush of breath, the way his body had moved with hers. It felt raw, primal, something real. But now that it was over, now that the weight of reality was pressing in on her, the aftertaste was bitter. She couldn't erase it. She couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. And then there was the other side of it. She hadn't just sought out physical relief. She had sought connection. She had sought the feeling of being truly seen and wanted, the kind of intimacy that had been missing from her marriage for far too long. The guilt was there, gnawing at her, but in the quiet corners of her mind, there was something else, a strange, unsettling sense of fulfillment. For the first time in so long, she felt alive. But was it worth it? Was the fleeting sense of being truly desired enough to justify what she had done? As she dressed, the reality of the consequences hit her harder than ever. What would she tell Matt? How would she face him after what had happened? She couldn't look at herself in the mirror without seeing the reflection of someone who had lost control, someone who had betrayed not only him but herself. She was supposed to be better than this, wasn't she? But somewhere along the way, she had stopped caring about the things that once held value. She had stopped believing in the vows she had taken. The more she thought about it, the more it became clear that this wasn't just an affair. It was a symptom of something deeper, a deep dissatisfaction that had been festering for years. She had tried to fill the emptiness with distractions, with efforts to revive the passion in her marriage, but all those attempts had fallen flat. And now, here she was, a participant in an act of infidelity, trying to make sense of the chaos she had created. She couldn't take it back, but she could feel the weight of the decision, pressing down on her, filling her with a sick sense of remorse. But no matter how much guilt weighed on her, she couldn't deny that she had felt something real, something raw, something that she had long forgotten. And that frightened her. It frightened her because it meant that the problem wasn't just with Matt, it was with her. She had been the one who had lost herself, the one who had become numb to the life she had built. And now, as the guilt wrapped around her like a shackle, she realized she was facing a deeper question. Could she ever go back to the life she had before? Or had this affair irreparably changed her, shattered something inside that could never be fixed? As she left, every step she took felt heavier than the last, and with each one, she couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of the end. The weight of her decision followed her like a shadow, lingering in every step she took. She had left, but she was still tethered to the moment, still haunted by the choice she had made. Her mind was a swirling mess of guilt, longing, and confusion. Each time she tried to focus on something else, her thoughts would inevitably drift back to him. It was as though the act itself had unlocked something inside her, something she couldn't just ignore or dismiss. There was no pretending it hadn't happened, no erasing the memory of how it felt. At home, the silence greeted her like an old friend. Matt was in the kitchen, reading the paper, his presence so familiar, yet so distant. The contrast between the warm, quiet space and the storm of emotions raging inside her was almost suffocating. She forced herself to smile, to act normal, but every word felt like it was being spoken through a thick layer of glass. She couldn't look at him without seeing the betrayal in her mind. She couldn't pretend everything was fine when the truth of what she had done had already begun to erode the foundation of her life. She found herself wondering if he knew, if somehow, in some way, he could sense the shift in her. But no, he was as distracted as ever, focused on his own routine, his own world. It was almost painful how invisible she had become to him. The irony of it all didn't escape her. She had stepped outside her marriage to find something she hadn't realized she was missing: connection, desire, passion. And yet, here she was, sitting next to the man who was supposed to be her partner, feeling more alone than ever. She couldn't stay in this limbo forever. The longer she pretended nothing had changed, the more unbearable it became. Every interaction with Matt felt like a performance, an act she had to put on to avoid confronting the truth. But the truth was staring her in the face, and it was ugly. She had crossed a line. There was no going back, no simple way to undo what had been done. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the real issue wasn't the affair itself. It was what the affair had revealed about her own emptiness, about how far she had drifted from who she once was. It wasn't just a matter of being unfaithful. It was a matter of self-discovery. The affair had given her something that she hadn't realized she was missing, a sense of being alive, of being seen, of feeling desired. But at what cost? The guilt consumed her, but so did the truth that she had been craving something for so long, something that she hadn't been able to find within the confines of her marriage. She knew that she couldn't keep living this double life, pretending everything was okay, while inside, she was unraveling. She couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in her chest that she had to make a choice, a real choice about what she wanted from her life moving forward. Was it worth salvaging the marriage with Matt? Could she rebuild the connection that had long since faded? Or had she crossed a point of no return, where the only way out was to embrace the new reality?